The phone buzzed loudly on the kitchen counter, breaking the silence that had settled over the house. It was late past midnight, and Evelyn was still awake cleaning up after the dinner she'd made for her husband Daniel and their two teenage children. The children were tucked in bed, their laughter still echoing in her ears. It had been a good day, too, good perhaps for the storm she had no idea was brewing on the other side of the door. She wiped her hands on the towel, glanced over at the buzzing phone, and picked it up. The name on the screen made her heart stop. Daniel. But it wasn't his usual tone. There was no "I'm thinking of you" or "good night, babe." No. It was a text from him, but not one she was prepared for. She opened the message, her eyes scanning the words quickly before her mind could even process what she was seeing. "I'm sorry, I'm leaving. I met someone else." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The room seemed to collapse around her. She stared at the phone, willing the words to disappear. There had to be a mistake, there had to be an explanation. But there wasn't. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her own heartbeat pounding violently in her chest. Her body shook as if it couldn't catch up with the reality of the words she'd just read. She stumbled back, gripping the counter to steady herself, her mind racing through every moment, every conversation, every kiss, every laugh she had shared with Daniel. None of it made sense. He had been her partner for over 20 years. The father of their children, the man she had trusted more than anyone, the man she thought she knew. How could he do this to her? Evelyn's hand trembled as she slid the phone across the counter. She stood frozen in the silence, listening to the night around her, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft rustle of leaves against the window. She wanted to scream, wanted to lash out, but instead she was suffocated by a numbness that took over her whole body. What had gone wrong? How had it come to this? Evelyn turned her back to the kitchen and slowly walked toward the living room, her mind spinning out of control. There was no anger yet, just disbelief. She had always imagined that if this moment ever came, she'd be ready for it. But she wasn't. She wasn't ready for any of it. The truth hung in the air like a heavy fog, and Evelyn was left standing in the middle of it, her heart broken and her world shattered. Evelyn sat down on the couch, the weight of the moment settling around her like an invisible blanket. The room seemed to close in on her, the soft glow from the lamp casting long shadows against the walls. The silence was deafening. She could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, but it only reminded her of how still everything had become. She had been married to Daniel for over 20 years. She had devoted herself to him, to their family. She had put aside her own career, her own dreams in the name of family. It wasn't as if she had been some passive partner in their marriage. No, she had built a life alongside him. They had raised their children together, nurtured their home, and made memories that were supposed to last a lifetime. But now that life was crumbling in front of her, how could he do this? How could he just throw away everything they had built? The more Evelyn thought about it, the more the weight of the betrayal pressed down on her chest. Her hands were still trembling as she reached for her phone. She dialed Daniel's number, her heart hammering in her throat. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. No answer. She tried again. The phone rang, but there was still no response. Her stomach twisted with each unanswered ring. Why wouldn't he pick up? Was he with her right now? Evelyn's mind spiraled, imagining all the ways her husband could have betrayed her. She had never thought of Daniel as someone capable of this kind of cruelty. He had always been the charming, considerate man, the one who made her laugh when the days were long and exhausting, the one who promised they'd grow old together. And yet here she was, alone in the dark, with nothing but a text message to explain it all. The minutes dragged on like hours, and Evelyn found herself pacing back and forth across the living room. She couldn't sit still, she couldn't think straight. What did this mean for her? For their children? How could she explain this? What was she supposed to do with this overwhelming pain that was slowly consuming her? Her mind screamed for answers, but there were none. No explanations, no apologies. Just a simple message that shattered her entire world. And then, like a slap in the face, another thought struck her. Had she missed the signs? Had there been hints along the way that she had refused to see? She thought back to the last few months, the way Daniel had been distant, the late nights at the office, the excuses for missing family dinners. She had chalked it up to work stress, to the pressures of their busy lives. She had never suspected that something deeper was at play. How could I have been so blind, she thought bitterly. How could I have not seen what was happening right under my nose? Evelyn's head swam with conflicting emotions. She was angry at Daniel for betraying her, angry at herself for not noticing sooner, angry at the world for making her feel so helpless. But above all, she was heartbroken. How could she have been so wrong about the man she had loved for so long? The pain was raw, overwhelming, suffocating. And yet amid the chaos, Evelyn felt something else stirring within her. Something she hadn't felt in years. A spark. A fire. A sense of resolve. She stood still, her gaze fixed on the floor, her breath coming in shallow gasps. What was she going to do now? She couldn't just sit here and let this consume her. She wouldn't. She couldn't. Her mind raced, calculating the options in front of her. Should she confront Daniel? Should she confront her, the woman who had taken everything from her? No. Evelyn wasn't the type of woman to act impulsively. She wasn't going to lose herself in a fit of rage, throwing all her dignity out the window. She had spent too many years building her life, her family, and she wasn't going to let some affair destroy everything. No, she would do things her way. She would make sure that she was in control. Evelyn wasn't going to let this betrayal break her. She would get her justice. She would rebuild. The realization was both a relief and a challenge. The pain was still there, but there was something else too, a quiet strength, a determination to not let herself be a victim. This wasn't the end. Not for her. Not by a long shot. Evelyn turned off her phone and set it on the coffee table. She sat back on the couch, her hands folding neatly in her lap as she closed her eyes. She needed to think, she needed to plan. And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt like she had the power to do whatever it took to reclaim her life. The next few days passed in a blur. Evelyn hardly slept, her mind, never quiet, always running through scenarios, possibilities, and a growing sense of unease. Daniel had still not answered her calls, and his absence was felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. The children, unaware of the storm brewing, carried on with their daily routines, their laughter echoing through the house, but Evelyn's thoughts were miles away from their innocence. She had always prided herself on being a calm, collected woman. She was the pillar of the family, the one who kept everything running smoothly. Now she found herself struggling to hold on to the fragments of that image, wondering who she had become, who she had allowed herself to become all these years. Her life had been a carefully crafted facade of routine meals prepared, children driven to school, Daniel's needs met before her own. She had put everyone before herself, convinced that the sacrifices she made would somehow bring her happiness. But now, sitting alone in the quiet of the house, she realized how much of herself she had lost along the way. She was a woman who had sacrificed her passions, her career, even her sense of self for the sake of keeping the family together. But in the end, it had been for nothing, or so it seemed. Evelyn spent the next few days quietly observing her family, trying to pick up on any signs, any clues that might reveal more about Daniel's betrayal. She couldn't just ignore it. She couldn't let it slip away without understanding the full extent of it. There had to be more to the story than just his departure. She was certain of it. One afternoon, while the children were at school, Evelyn found herself standing in the hallway outside their bedroom, staring at the door. Her hand hovered over the handle as she took a deep breath, summoning the courage to enter. She hadn't stepped foot in their room since the night Daniel left, since the moment everything shattered. She had avoided it, unwilling to confront the emptiness that filled that space now. But today she had to. She needed to know. With a quiet exhale, Evelyn opened the door. The room was as it had always been, familiar and unchanged. The bed still unmade from the last time they had shared it. His clothes were still scattered in the corner. His things, his presence were still here. She walked slowly toward the closet, her fingers brushing the edge of the door, almost as if she was afraid of what she might find. She stepped inside and began to sift through his belongings, picking up shirts, ties, jackets, each one reminding her of the man she had loved, the man she thought she knew. But this wasn't about love anymore. This was about finding the truth. Then she found it. At the very back of the closet, buried beneath his suits, was a small leather bag. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she pulled it out, her mind racing. She opened it slowly, almost unwilling to face what she might uncover. Inside, she found a stack of papers. letters, receipts, and at the top of the pile a photograph. Her stomach twisted as she picked it up. It was a picture of Daniel standing with a woman Evelyn didn't recognize. The photo was clearly taken in a hotel room, luxurious, intimate, and filled with the kind of warmth that Evelyn had once shared with him. The woman in the picture was smiling, leaning against him, her arm draped over his shoulder. And Daniel was smiling too in a way Evelyn had never seen before. Her hands clenched around the photo as she fought to breathe. The evidence was undeniable. He had been lying to her. For how long? How many more of these photos were there? How many other secrets had he kept from her? Evelyn felt the rage rising in her chest, the anger bubbling up like a storm, but she suppressed it, holding it back. She couldn't afford to act impulsively. No, this wasn't the time for wild emotions. This was the time for a plan. With the photo still clenched in her hand, she sat down on the bed. Her mind raced with thoughts of revenge, of how to confront him, of what to say. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand answers, but another part of her, the part she had lost over the years, felt something else. Something darker, a need for justice, for retribution. Evelyn wasn't going to let him walk away from this. She had given him everything, her time, her love, her devotion. And he had thrown it all away for someone else. She would make him pay. She would make sure that this betrayal didn't just go unnoticed. But how? She stood up abruptly, walking toward the window. Her mind was sharp, her emotions cold. She would use her head, not her heart. She would take control of the situation. She had been betrayed, but she wasn't a victim. She was a woman who could get things done. A woman who had survived every challenge life had thrown at her. And this would be no different. The plan began to take shape in her mind. It wouldn't be reckless. It would be calculated, precise. She would confront him, but on her terms. She would expose him for what he truly was, and she would take back everything he had taken from her. For the first time in days, Evelyn felt a sense of purpose. She wasn't broken. She wasn't defeated. She was stronger than ever. And she wasn't about to let him get away with it. Evelyn spent the next few days silently gathering information. She had already made up her mind she wasn't going to be passive in this. If Daniel thought he could just walk away without consequences, he was gravely mistaken. This wasn't about just confronting him or airing her pain. No. This was about making sure he understood the cost of his actions, the full weight of his betrayal. It was about taking back her life, her dignity, and her sense of self. She made a series of phone calls, silent, strategic ones. She reached out to a few trusted friends, to people who had known her and Daniel over the years. She was careful, subtle. She asked questions about his behavior in the past few months, gathering every scrap of information she could. Some of her friends had noticed subtle changes, late nights, unexplained absences. Others were unaware, caught up in their own lives. But there was one conversation that stood out. It came from a mutual acquaintance, someone who had always been in the background of their lives. When Evelyn mentioned Daniel's recent behavior, the voice on the other end of the line faltered for just a second. That hesitation was all Evelyn needed. "I didn't want to say anything, but I heard he's been seeing someone else," the acquaintance had admitted, voice low, almost embarrassed. "I didn't know how to tell you, Evelyn. I never thought he'd—" "Who?" Evelyn's voice was steady, but the question cut through the air like a blade. She wasn't asking out of curiosity anymore. She needed answers, and she needed them now. "I don't know her name," came the reply. "But she's someone he's been seeing for months. I don't think it's just casual. He's been talking about her a lot lately, in that way where you can tell he's, I don't know, attached. Sorry I didn't tell you sooner." Evelyn didn't reply. She didn't need to. She hung up the phone, her mind already racing. Months. He'd been seeing her for months. And here she was thinking the distance between them was just work stress, just the grind of daily life. She had been living a lie. Her entire world had been one long, cruel illusion. But now she had a lead. The pieces began to fall into place. Evelyn wasn't just going to confront Daniel in a moment of rage. She wasn't going to allow her emotions to cloud her judgment. She had to be smart. The next step was critical. She had to know everything. The next day she met with a private investigator. The man was quiet, efficient. He didn't ask many questions, just the basics. Daniel's routine, his habits, the places he frequented. Evelyn, for the first time in years, felt a strange sense of power. She was taking control. No longer would she sit idly by and wait for the man who had been her partner for over 2 decades to just sweep everything under the rug. She was taking the reins now. The investigator assured her he would find everything she needed. The following week, he would have more information, concrete evidence that would allow Evelyn to build her case. But for now, she had to wait. Waiting was the hardest part. Every second felt like a lifetime. She felt like a stranger in her own home, her emotions a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and a strange, simmering calm. But deep down, there was an unsettling satisfaction in knowing that she wasn't helpless anymore. She wasn't a passive victim. She had a plan, and she was following through. As the days dragged on, Evelyn kept herself busy. She focused on the kids, making sure they were oblivious to the turmoil she was experiencing. She threw herself into organizing their school events, into being the perfect mother. She was no longer interested in being the perfect wife. That role had been ripped away from her. Then came the day the investigator called. The voice on the other end was steady, almost clinical. "I've got what you need. We've got her." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" "The woman," he said, and there was a brief pause. "Her name is Rachel Sinclair. She's been seeing your husband for the past 6 months. I've got photos, receipts, travel records. I've got everything you need to confront him." Evelyn's mind raced. She felt a rush of adrenaline, a mix of fear and anticipation. This was it. This was the moment. She had everything she needed now. The plan was coming together. She didn't speak for a moment. She didn't need to. The silence was all the confirmation she needed. She was ready. When the investigator sent her the files, Evelyn opened them slowly. Photos, records, hotel bookings, everything. Each page filled her with a sickening combination of disbelief and relief. There was no doubt now. Her suspicions were justified. The betrayal was real. And now she had the power to make sure Daniel knew that she knew. The next few days were spent preparing. Evelyn was methodical, precise. She didn't rush this. She waited until the timing was right, until Daniel had no idea what was coming. One evening, as the sun began to set and the children were away at a school event, Evelyn set the stage. She invited Daniel to dinner. She cooked his favorite meal, laid out a glass of wine, and sat across from him at the table. When he walked in, he was his usual self, charming, oblivious. He kissed her on the cheek, and for a moment, everything felt normal. But Evelyn wasn't fooled. Not anymore. She watched him carefully as they ate, and then, when the time was right, she spoke. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice steady but every word laced with purpose. "I know about Rachel." Daniel froze mid-bite, his fork suspended in the air. The room, once filled with the clinking of silverware and the hum of quiet conversation, fell into a heavy silence. Evelyn's gaze was unwavering. Her eyes locked on his, as if she were watching for any sign of denial, any flicker of surprise. But Daniel didn't react the way she expected. He didn't panic. Instead, he slowly lowered his fork and put it down on the plate. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. It was as though the weight of the words hung in the air, and Daniel was trying to figure out if he could still talk his way out of it. But Evelyn knew better than to let him. She wasn't angry, not yet. But the calm she felt now was far more dangerous than any outburst of rage. It was the calm before the storm, the calm that signaled her total control. "Who told you?" Daniel finally asked, his voice quiet but not exactly remorseful. Evelyn didn't flinch. "Does it matter?" He leaned back in his chair, a small frown playing at the corners of his mouth. "Evelyn, this isn't what you think. I didn't want to hurt you. Stop!" Her voice was sharp, cutting through the excuses he was about to offer. "Don't even try. I've seen the pictures. I have the receipts. I know everything. So don't sit there and lie to me." His face changed just slightly. A shadow passed over his eyes. He took a deep breath, as if gathering himself, and then finally he looked up at her. His tone softened, almost pleading. "I never meant for things to get this far. No." Evelyn stood up abruptly, her hands pressing down on the table as she leaned forward. "You don't get to tell me your excuses. You don't get to explain away the years of my life that you've taken from me. You don't get to act like this is something that just happened." The anger started to rise now, but Evelyn contained it. She had been waiting for this moment, but she knew she needed to make him feel the full extent of what he had done, not just with her words, but with the cold, calculated way she handled it. I've spent 2 decades of my life giving up everything for you, Daniel. My career, my friends, my family, all of it was for you. And for what? For this. For you to throw it all away for some woman who doesn't even know you. You don't deserve any explanation from me. Daniel opened his mouth to say something, but Evelyn wasn't finished. She wasn't going to let him turn this back on her. Not this time. You think I don't know what you've been doing, the late nights at the office, the business trips, the phone calls I was never supposed to hear. You thought I was too blind to see it. You thought I was too busy being the perfect wife to notice. Her voice trembled now, but not with weakness. It was the tremor of someone who had finally found their strength, their power. Daniel's face shifted. There was guilt there now, but there was also something else, something darker. He wasn't sorry. Not truly, he was just caught. And Evelyn could see that. Evelyn. He reached across the table, but she pulled back before his hand could touch hers. Don't. Don't touch me. You don't get that anymore. Daniel's eyes narrowed, his mouth tightening in frustration. What do you want from me? What do you expect me to say? I'm sorry, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Evelyn's laugh was dry, almost bitter. What do I expect from you? You want to know what I expect? I expect the man I married to show up and take responsibility for his actions. But I'm not sure that man even exists anymore. She stood up the chair, scraping sharply against the hardwood floor. For a brief moment, she considered walking out, ending the conversation here. But then something in her shifted. This wasn't just about confronting him. This was about showing him the full extent of her power. This was her moment of reckoning. Do you think I'm just going to let you walk away from this? She said, her voice now cold and commanding. Do you think I'm just going to stand here and watch you leave me and our family for her, and let you pretend it's okay? Daniel stood up, his face reddening with frustration. Evelyn, stop. I can't keep living this lie. I don't love you anymore. The words struck her like a slap across the face. Her chest tightened, but she forced herself to keep calm, to keep her composure. She had anticipated this moment. She knew this would hurt. But the damage wasn't hers to bear anymore. It was his. Then you don't get to have everything, she said quietly, her voice filled with finality. You don't get to walk away without facing the consequences. Daniel looked at her confused, but Evelyn wasn't about to explain herself. He didn't deserve an explanation. She had already given him too much over the years. I've made my decision, Daniel, and now so have I. With that, Evelyn turned and walked out of the room, leaving him standing there speechless. She didn't know exactly what was coming next, but one thing was clear: she wasn't done. She wasn't going to let him get away with this. And whatever came next, she would make sure it was her choice. She would take control of her life, her future, and her justice. The following days felt like a whirlwind, though Evelyn moved through them with a calm precision that surprised even herself. The house, once a warm sanctuary of family life, now felt like a battlefield. Every room echoed with the ghost of what had been her life with Daniel, the life she thought she understood. But she wasn't living in the past anymore. Evelyn had made her decision, and she was moving forward step by calculated step. Daniel had tried calling her, of course, several times, but Evelyn ignored every call. She didn't need his apologies, his half-baked explanations. She had heard enough. It wasn't his words that mattered anymore. It was his actions that had defined everything. And right now she had no interest in giving him the satisfaction of a conversation he could twist in his favor. Instead, Evelyn focused on her plan. She had everything she needed: the photographs, the receipts, the information from the private investigator. But most importantly, she had her mind set on a course of action that would ensure Daniel felt every ounce of the betrayal she had felt, every ounce of the life she had given up for him. That Friday, she took a trip to a local lawyer's office. She hadn't expected it to feel so final. Sitting there across from a woman who had heard countless stories of betrayal, Evelyn felt a surge of both empowerment and sadness. She was doing this for herself. She was doing it for her children. But it didn't make the process any easier. The lawyer was methodical, efficient. She took down the details, asked the right questions, and advised Evelyn on how best to proceed. Evelyn listened carefully, committing every word to memory. There were no guarantees, no quick fixes. But the lawyer made it clear with the evidence Evelyn had she had a strong case for a very favorable divorce settlement. When Evelyn left the office that day, she felt something shift inside her. There was no turning back now. Daniel had made his choice and she would make hers. The path she had started down was one that would lead her to independence, a future where she didn't have to live in the shadow of someone else's betrayal. She wasn't going to be his victim. She wasn't going to let this ruin her. But even as she made these decisions, Evelyn wasn't naive. She knew that the real work was just beginning. The legal process would be long, messy, and painful, but she was prepared. This was the next chapter of her life, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt in control. The next weekend, Daniel showed up at the house. He knocked on the door, standing there with a sheepish look on his face, holding a bouquet of flowers in his hands. Evelyn had already known he would come. She had expected it, in fact. But when she opened the door and saw him standing there, still handsome, still wearing that confident, charming smile that had once made her heart skip a beat, it was like staring at a stranger. He was still trying to play the part of the loving husband, the man who had made a mistake and was now ready to make amends. He looked her over, his eyes softening as he held out the flowers. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," he said quietly. "I've been thinking a lot. I know I messed up. I want to make things right. Please let me explain." "No." Evelyn cut him off, her voice clear and firm. She didn't let him finish. "I don't need your explanation anymore, Daniel. You made your choice, and now so have I." For the briefest moment, she saw the mask crack. His eyes faltered, and she saw it, the briefest flicker of fear, but she didn't let it sway her. She had nothing left to say to him. She took the flowers from his hands, placed them on the table beside the door, and stepped aside. "You need to leave." Daniel looked at her. His lips parted, but no words came. He looked lost, almost desperate, as if he was still trying to reach the woman he had once known. But Evelyn had no intention of being reached anymore. "I don't want to see you again, Daniel," she said. "Not until this is over." His shoulders slumped and he turned away without another word. For a moment, Evelyn felt a pang in her chest, a flicker of sadness, of loss. But it was fleeting. This wasn't about her emotions anymore. This was about justice. This was about taking back everything he had taken from her. The following week, Evelyn made her move. She filed for divorce. She presented her case to the lawyer, including the evidence she had painstakingly gathered. The photos, the receipts, the records of Daniel's lies and affairs. Evelyn wasn't just seeking a divorce. She was seeking something more. She was seeking control. Control of her future. Control of her life. As the legal proceedings dragged on, Daniel's attempts to get her to change her mind grew more frantic. He offered apologies. He promised things would be different. But every time Evelyn stood her ground. She was not the woman he had left behind. She had rebuilt herself piece by piece, and she wasn't going to let him tear her down again. But as the weeks passed and the divorce papers neared finalization, Evelyn couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something more. Something else Daniel hadn't told her. The secret she hadn't uncovered yet. She had what she needed, but something still felt unfinished. One evening, a week before the final hearing, Evelyn was sitting in her living room, reviewing the documents one last time when the phone rang. It was the private investigator again. "I've got something," he said, his voice tight. "Something you should know." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat as she quickly set down the papers and picked up the phone. The investigator's tone was different this time, urgent, almost tense. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "There's more," he said, his voice low. "Something I didn't find before. Something that could change everything." Evelyn's stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" "Daniel," he continued. "He's been hiding more than just an affair. There's something, someone else. I don't think you are the only one being deceived." Evelyn's mind raced. "What do you mean?" The investigator took a breath, and then he dropped the bombshell. "I found evidence that he's been involved in some financial dealings you wouldn't know about. Money laundering, Evelyn. It seems like he's been using your assets to cover his tracks, buying properties, funneling money to shell companies. I don't know the full extent of it yet, but it's big." The words hit her like a physical blow. Evelyn leaned back against the couch, trying to process what she was hearing. Daniel, her husband of over 2 decades, had been living a double life, a life of lies, of deceit, not just emotionally but financially as well. Her mind reeled. The betrayal was worse than she could have imagined. He hadn't just lied about the affair, he had been hiding entire layers of his life, masking his true nature from her all along. How long had this been going on? How much had she missed? What else was he hiding? Evelyn couldn't breathe for a moment, the weight of it all bearing down on her chest. She'd always trusted Daniel. She'd always believed that their life together had been built on honesty. But now she realized that the very foundation of their marriage had been rotten from the start. "Do you have the evidence?" Evelyn asked, her voice breaking the silence. "I'm sending it to you now," the investigator replied. "This is just the tip of the iceberg, but it's enough to put him in serious trouble. If you want to use this in court, I'll be ready to back you up." Evelyn hung up the phone, her hands trembling as she navigated to her email. The investigator had already sent her the files, documents, transaction records, screenshots of communications. She scanned through them, her eyes widening with each new piece of evidence. Daniel had been living a double life, pulling strings behind her back, using their money, their reputation to cover up his tracks. Her mind was racing. Not only had he betrayed her emotionally, but he had also committed financial crimes. It was a twist Evelyn hadn't anticipated, but it was the kind of twist she would use to her advantage. This wasn't just about him breaking her heart anymore. This was about making sure he faced the consequences for everything he had done, both to her and to their family. The emotions that had consumed her for weeks, the betrayal, the anger, the heartbreak, now seemed almost trivial in comparison. What Daniel had done went far beyond infidelity. He had stolen from her, from their children, and he would pay for it. She wasn't going to let him walk away with just a divorce. No, this was a fight, and Evelyn wasn't about to lose. The next day, Evelyn made another call to the lawyer. She needed to prepare herself for what came next. As she explained the new information, the lawyer's voice took on a tone of deep concern. "You've got the upper hand now, Evelyn," the lawyer said. "This new information is a game changer. We'll use it to press for the most favorable settlement possible. If Daniel has been involved in money laundering, this could affect his finances, his assets, everything he's built. You can't let him get away with it." "I won't," Evelyn replied, the steely resolve in her voice unmistakable. "I want everything he owes me, everything he's stolen, and I won't settle for less." The lawyer agreed, setting the stage for a much more aggressive approach in court. With the financial documents and the evidence of Daniel's illegal activities, Evelyn now had the leverage she needed to ensure she walked away from this with more than just a divorce. She would take back what was hers, every last bit of it. The final court hearing arrived quickly. Evelyn felt a strange sense of calm as she entered the courtroom. She had prepared for this moment for so long. It wasn't just about ending her marriage anymore. It was about reclaiming her life and ensuring Daniel's deceit didn't go unpunished. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. As they sat across from each other in the sterile, impersonal courtroom, Daniel looked different. His confident air, the charm he had always exuded, was gone. He looked tired, defeated. His usual bravado had crumbled, and Evelyn could see the panic in his eyes. The lawyer for the defense tried to downplay the evidence, to claim it was a misunderstanding, that the financial records were not as they seemed, but Evelyn wasn't having it. She stood up, her voice unwavering, as she presented the evidence the investigator had uncovered. The photographs, the financial records, the shell companies. She watched as Daniel's face paled as his lies were systematically dismantled in front of the judge. For the first time in the entire process, Evelyn felt something akin to satisfaction. This was no longer about hurt or heartbreak. This was about power, the power to take back control, to expose the truth, and to make sure Daniel faced the consequences of his actions. When the judge finally spoke, Evelyn could hardly believe what she was hearing. The settlement was in her favor, but there was more. The evidence of financial misconduct had been too much to ignore. Daniel's assets were frozen, and he would face an investigation into his dealings. It was a blow that would send him reeling for years to come. As the proceedings came to a close, Evelyn stood there feeling a mixture of relief and triumph. The man who had betrayed her, the man who had thought he could get away with everything, was now facing the fallout of his actions. But she wasn't done yet. As the bailiffs ushered Daniel out of the courtroom, Evelyn felt a flicker of something deep inside her, a sense of freedom. She had walked into that courtroom feeling like a victim, but she was leaving feeling like a victor. She had taken back her life. She had taken back her future. And there was nothing Daniel could do to change that. The months that followed were transformative for Evelyn. What had started as a devastating betrayal had become the catalyst for her rebirth. She moved into a new apartment, a fresh start, away from the house that had once been filled with laughter, love, and the lies of a man who no longer had any power over her. The divorce settlement had been generous, more than she had expected. But it wasn't just the money or the assets that mattered. It was the sense of control, the knowledge that she had faced the darkness and come out the other side stronger. Evelyn threw herself into rebuilding her life, a life that was no longer defined by her marriage to Daniel. She returned to her career, which she had abandoned years ago for the sake of her family. She took a job in a field she had always loved, but never had time for marketing and branding. It felt strange at first, but it also felt right. She was rediscovering the parts of herself that had been buried for so long. She also reconnected with old friends, the ones she had let slip away, while she focused on being the perfect wife and mother. They welcomed her with open arms, and their support was like a balm for the wounds Daniel had inflicted. It wasn't easy at first. There were moments of loneliness, moments where the weight of the past would creep back in. But Evelyn was no longer afraid of those moments. She had learned how to embrace them, to sit with them, and to let them pass. Through it all, her children were her greatest source of strength. They were resilient, smart, and loving. They had weathered the storm and now they were thriving. Evelyn had been there for them, guiding them, nurturing them, but she had also allowed them the space to grow on their own. They were learning how to navigate the world on their own terms, and she was proud of them. It was on a quiet evening, several months after the divorce was finalized, that Evelyn finally allowed herself to relax. She was sitting on her balcony, a glass of wine in hand, as the city lights flickered below her. She had come a long way from the woman she had been, the woman who had stood in that empty house, devastated, betrayed, and unsure of her future. Now she felt like a different person altogether. She had reclaimed her life, her sense of self, and she was finally at peace. Then the phone rang. Evelyn hesitated for a moment before answering. It was Daniel. Of course it was Daniel. Her heart gave a strange, almost imperceptible jolt. It had been months since they had spoken, since the final court hearing, since she had seen him. And yet here he was calling her again. She took a deep breath before picking up the phone. "Hello, Daniel," she said, her voice calm, almost detached. "Evelyn," he said, his voice sounding tired. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know I've done things I can't take back. And I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I've been trying to fix things. I'm in therapy. I'm working on myself. And I just wanted you to know that." Evelyn paused for a moment, her mind drifting back to everything that had happened. The hurt, the betrayal, the anger. But as she listened to Daniel's voice, something inside her shifted. The pain was still there, buried deep within her, but it wasn't the defining part of who she was anymore. She had let go of that. She had moved forward. "You don't owe me an apology, Daniel," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not the same person I was when we were together. And I'm not angry anymore. I've built my life back. I'm stronger now, and I don't need your apologies to validate that." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Evelyn could hear him breathing, waiting for her to say more to let him in. But she wasn't going to. Not anymore. "I hope you do find what you're looking for, Daniel." She continued, her voice soft but firm. "But that person, the one you were with me, the one you lied to, she's gone. I don't need you to fix anything. I fixed it all myself." She hung up the phone before he could respond, setting it down with a sense of finality. Evelyn looked out at the city, the distant lights twinkling like stars in the vast night sky. The past was just that, the past. And now she was free, truly free. The truth, Evelyn realized, wasn't just about exposing the lies. It wasn't just about confronting the betrayal. The truth was about finding herself again, about reclaiming her power, and about knowing that she could stand tall no matter what life threw at her. She took a long sip of wine and smiled softly to herself. She had been knocked down, but she had risen again, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. And now as she looked ahead, she knew that no one, not even Daniel, could take away the life she had built for herself. She was finally at peace, and that was the most powerful revenge of all.